Nature abhors a vacuum. Someone pretty smart said that back in the day. I don't know who, but when I get home, I'll look it up and I'll put it like right there. See, just like that. That was fast. Aristotle. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Grecian genius probably wasn't talking about rock music on the AM radio. But in the late 1950s, a vacuum is exactly what hit the American airwaves. Because after 5 steady years of rocking around the clock, jailhouse rocking, and learning the roundabout location of Johnny B. Good's log cabin, America woke up one morning in 1959 to discover its biggest rock stars were either in jail, in the army, in church, or God forbid, dead. And in their place stood a bunch of pasty white guys singing about Mac the Knife and the Battle of New Orleans and whatever Paul Anka was on about. So indeed, a vacuum had hit rock music that needed to be filled. And with the Beatles still at least 4 years away, now is the perfect time for something new, something cool, something innovative, to surf the airwaves, if you will, into America's collective conscious and make the next half decade its own. Also, let's talk about Cadillac. Inspiration. That mysterious, often uncontrollable thought wave we ride in hopes of putting new ideas in motion. For some, inspiration is one of the most priceless commodities in the world, as its fleeting nature means that people drop everything when it strikes just to make the most of the precious opportunity it provides. Others seem to be able to find an endless supply of inspiration in anything that's around them, which isn't always a good thing, as in the wrong hands, inspiration can lead to things like a teapot that looks like Hitler, or celery-flavored Jell-O, or the PT Cruiser. But inspiration done right can get you something pretty damn cool. Something like this Cadillac. Now, you might remember Cadillac from such cars as the $90,000 Escalade or the CTS. CTS is what that's called. But, believe it or not, there was a period of time when Cadillac made good cars, inspired cars. Cars like this 1960 Coupe de Ville, the design of which is an evolution of the inspiration that Frank Hershey first took from the P-38 Lightning in the late 1940s. And by the 1960 model year de Ville, that airplane tailfin inspired design had merged rather beautifully with the cultural zeitgeist of the era.
Space, the final frontier.
Yes, America was space mad in the early 1960s. I mean, you could see it everywhere, in the architecture, in the fashion, and in the cars. And fueled by a space race rivalry with Russia, our astronomical fever lasted the entire decade. And Russia was beating us at every turn. First artificial satellite in space, first dog in space because that was necessary, and ultimately, first man in space, which, besides the bragging rights, also got Yuri Gagarin this sweet monument of himself. I think that was worth the trouble right there. I think all the dog got was a stamp. Soon, though, America had just about enough of Russia's shit and commenced with the most "come at me, bro" moment of the space race, and the one that ultimately made Russia take its ball and go home. Talking, of course, about putting a man on the moon. Now, I still think they should have sent Bruce Springsteen up there to take that one small step, just to really solidify it as the most American moment in U.S. history. But Neil Armstrong did just fine. And he was from Ohio. But the point is, here's a car manufacturer that was being inspired by what was going on around them. An inspiration that started with the airplane was now being influenced by the space age. And the Coupe de Ville wore that inspiration on its sleeve, and quarter panels and taillights and greenhouse, as it were. And in doing so was giving back to the culture a new interpretation of the idea, further feeding that cycle of influence. So thoughtful Cadillac was. But actually, let's rewind a bit. Because in that decade of space-inspired hysteria and rocket ship tail fins, there was, at least for music, still quite the inspiration to be found down here on Earth as well. Just ask the folks who were waxing down their surfboards and couldn't wait till June. This is the Gulf of Mexico off the western coast of Florida. And when one thinks of surfing hotspots in America, this is not the place, actually. Look at these waves, they're terrible. But even if these waves aren't big enough to surf, they still represent the biggest influence on the sound of surf music, and that's reverb. Because the first time Southern California guitar players like Dick Dale heard this newfangled thing called spring reverb on their amps, the sound of it immediately took them to the beach, to the sound of the waves crashing not just in front of them, but all around them and way off in the distance as well. Because that's what reverb does. It gives your instrument not just a space to sit, but also move around in and trail off into. And those guitar players heard the sound of the waves in that reverb, and it was inspiring. And led now by that inspired guitar tone, there burst forth a musical movement that was the perfect reflection of the culture from which it came. Instrumental surf rock. Songs that, without even words, were able to place you exactly where they wanted you to be, at the beach, with the waves, and in the sun. And like the spaceship design of the era's Cadillacs, the surf rock sound was an honest and sincere reflection of what was happening in the culture. It was the waves, it was the beach, it was the Southern California attitude and vibe distilled down through guitars, amplifiers, and drums and poured back out through the listener's speakers. Now, surf rock thrived when it did, not only because America's newfound taste for rock and roll gave it a spot at the head table, but because it was actually good. Because even with the vacuum created from all the biggest rock stars of the era being out of the picture, surf rock still had to stand on its own to get people's attention. And it did. And that surf rock sound and energy and vibe, it permeated not just the radio, but TV and film as well. And yeah, Hawaii Five-0 is a given. But 1962 saw a little surf rock riff get introduced on the big screen, and make no mistake, no matter how they packaged it, this riff was quintessential surf rock. The tone, the reverb, the single note lines, it was all there. And it did pretty alright for itself. The movie franchise wasn't too bad either, I guess. But musically, surf rock had even more culturally important things at play here than just clean reverberated guitar. Because this music was, perhaps unconsciously, ushering in a transition between rock's earliest days of the mid-1950s to what was to come in the 1960s, and frankly, to what we still see today. And it was a transition that happened right from the get-go of the era, right in 1960, with one of the first songs that got the surf rock label. And it was a transition that actually had nothing to do with the electric guitar at all, as it was all happening here, on the drums. Because from the earliest days of popular music in the 20th century, there was a very specific feel that most songs with drums had, and that was a shuffle feel. And that shuffle beat you hear in the 1950s has this bounce, this lilt, this swing to it that worked perfectly for the music of the era. But it wasn't going to work for where rock needed to go. And because of that, there was a very distinct transition where that bouncy shuffle got straightened out and turned into a thriving pulsing rhythm. And humans being the primal animals that we are, we took quite a liking to that. And one of the earliest representations of the transition to that beat, which not only became the de facto standard surf beat, but also laid the groundwork for the straight 8 feel that we still hear today, was in 1960, and the Ventures version of Walk Don't Run. And of course now you think I'm going to say the 1960 Coupe de Ville was a transition point for Cadillac as well. And, well, you're right. Because as it turned out, in hindsight, the 60 DeVille was a transition point for the model. Because when you pull back and look at the chronology of Cadillac tail fins from the first ones in 1948 through the iconic and downright outlandish 1959 beasts, through the last vestige of fins in 1964, you'll see that 1960 was the turning point for that transition, as they only got smaller from there on out until 1964, after which they were never seen in their full glory again. And unfortunately, instrumental surf rock's moment in the sun all but ended as well between 64 and 65. Though it was no fault of its own, it was just really, really hard to keep anyone's attention on anything else once these guys showed up. But the mark surf rock left and the vacuum created in 1959, and with the precious little time it was given to leave it, is undeniable. Its legacy is that of a music that never actually died, but merely stepped out of the limelight of the mainstream to play on for the die-hard fans who continue to cherish and evolve it. It was and still is one of the great American musical contributions of the 20th century. And the one thing that's never changed is one of the first things that inspired it in the first place, that big wet guitar sound drenched in reverb. And Cadillac. Well, Cadillac's had a long history of at least trying its best, except when it wasn't. And even though the fact the 60 Coupe de Ville looks like a spaceship from the outside and definitely feels like one on the inside might seem weird or outrageous today, you absolutely cannot deny the immediate and lasting impression this car makes, compared to, say, a 2005 DeVille. Oh, were you waiting for me to put a picture up of that car? You mean you don't have a vision of that timeless classic seared into long-term memory? And that's the problem we have today. That car's only 11 years old. And we can't remember well enough to pick it out of a lineup between a Ford and a Toyota. And the worst part is, that 05 DeVille is a better car than this one in nearly every single way. It drives better, it stops better, it's safer. I mean, I don't even have seatbelts. Better gas mileage, it's more comfortable, it has air conditioning, a better stereo. It's a better car than this one in every single way except this. It's utterly forgettable and uninspired. And that's the thing with a lot of modern cars, and it's certainly not just Cadillac. It's that they seem to have lost that flair of inspiration in favor of design by focus group. And I know that that's a bit of a tired talking point. I'm not going to go on about it, but I think it's worth bringing up here. When cars are designed by a table of people patting each other on the back for shouting out generic buzzwords, and with more concern over Wi-Fi connectivity than driver-to-car connectivity, you lose something. You lose this. Something unforgettable. Something that captured a moment. Something inspired. All right, well, let's end by going all the way back to Aristotle's vacuum of 1959, the year that saw the terrible plane crash that killed Ritchie Valens and Buddy Holly in The Big Bopper, and the year you could go out and buy a 1960 Cadillac Coupe de Ville brand new. Because it also happened to be the year that saw the release of one of the greatest instrumental songs of all time, a song that everybody's heard and everybody knows within 3 notes. And while it might not be a surf rock song in the traditional sense that we've just been talking about, it is, at least to my ear, a progenitor of the surf rock sound that was to come, because it has all the undeniable traits. The reverb, the timeless melody, and most importantly, the way it has the power to take you away somewhere with it. And maybe this song influenced surf rock, and maybe it didn't. And maybe it's only a coincidence that it shares a strong bond, what is commonly regarded as the modern birthplace of surfing, Hawaii, and that the lap steel that the song is played on has a long celebrated history on the island. But I don't think it's a stretch to hear this song and picture yourself on the beach with the sun going down behind the waves. Or in your Cadillac Coupe de Ville, cruising down the road with your best gal by your side. Or however they used to call girlfriends back in the 50s, I don't know.